Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Young and Powerful with Joy Hayley and Sexuality. Today, I am here with the amazing Joy Munthali from Green Girls platform in Malawi. So I'm going to hand it straight over to you. Joy, let's do an introduction. Who is Joy, and what does the Green Girls platform do?
Thank you, Poppy, for the great introduction. My name is Joy Hayley Munthali. I'm from Malawi, and I am a youth activist as well as a climate activist. And I love working with girls and young women just to help them realize their dreams and show them that they have unlimited potential and they can achieve anything they want to. And so Green Girls Platform is a female-led initiative that I founded in 2016. And we work on addressing the unique challenges that girls and young women face in Malawi, especially on climate change and the violence that comes from climate change. Okay.
Thank you. And it's always funny on a podcast because like obviously people can only hear us, but I'm sitting here like nodding when you're like, yeah, girls, young women, young people. And
Yeah.
it's amazing the work that you do. And so you say that you started in 2016.
Yeah.
How did you come about? Like, where did the idea for Green Girls platform come from?
So when I was in college, I was studying environmental science. And because I was studying environmental science and I was the leader of a college campus club that we called Students for Climate Justice, I was usually invited to conferences and to talk about the role of young women on climate change. But then I was the only girl that was constantly being invited there. I was the only girl in the room. I was the only one representing girls and young women. But then in my class, we were like 30 girls. And I knew a lot of powerful women that were in the climate change sector. And so this other time I was invited to a conference on gender. They call it a gender dialogue or gender dialogue or something. And then when I got into the room, I found that 80% of the room were men and 20% were women. It was like 50 people and 40 were men and 10 were women. And so after the conversation, I talked to the organizer. I was like, this is a conversation about gender. Why is the room not even representative? What's going on? And then he said, girls and women are not interested in having those kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back home and I was like, no, that's not true. That can't be true because I know I'm interested and I know a lot of girls that are interested. And so I just wanted to prove him wrong, but also I was angry because I knew that that was a wrong narrative. And so after that, I just decided to come up with a platform that just gets girls in and talk about climate change and what climate change is. And so we started having those kinds of conversations in primary schools, in communities, and in secondary schools. And we would just have girls come in and talk about it. And then one of my friends was like, what if we had to actually set up a structure that just brings girls in, that we teach about climate change and then discuss about what we can do as girls and young women on climate change in Malawi. And then that's when the name Green Girls came about. We're like, okay, this is something that we can actually do and can actually bring girls in. And then about maybe a year or 2 years later, that's when we started making the connections between climate change and violence and gender-based violence and sexual reproductive health rights and how girls and young women were being affected by climate change disproportionately. But then there were the ones who were not considered in any decision-making spaces. And then we were like, okay, this is really critical work and we really have to do this. So yeah, that's basically how it came about.
Amazing. Like you found a gap that needed to be filled and you just went right on in there. I love it.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that you also started like in the student way or like very grassroots, because then you're getting the the opinions and the experiences from communities themselves, and it's not like very top down, the government's deciding what needs to be done. No, you're talking to the people who are experiencing climate change and everything. I love it. I'm such a fan. I was also stalking you guys on social media before this
Oh,
podcast.
wow. You're really a fan.
I really am. Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited to talk to you today because I think the link between the climate crisis and sexual and reproductive health rights, or SRHR as we'll probably refer to it, yeah, the link is very present, but it's very under researched and not implemented enough, not like tackled enough. So can you explain a bit more about like why centering girls and young people specifically in your work on the climate crisis is so important?
Okay, so this is something that I'm really passionate about, and I love talking about it
Great.
because, as you already mentioned, it's under research and it doesn't have it doesn't get the attention that it needs to, because climate change affects everyone, but then we have to admit that it affects other groups differently, especially marginalized groups like girls and young women. And I would talk from the perspective of Malawi, which is like a less developed country. And for um, girls and women are the ones that are always doing household chores. And usually girls are the ones that have to go and draw water, that have to go and draw fire, that have to go and fetch firewood. And they're the ones that have to do that even when there is a climate crisis going on. And so recently in Malawi, we have had droughts, we have had floods, and we have had cyclones hit the country. And so you find that water bodies are now dried up, or they're in very faraway areas, and girls have to walk those longer distances to go and fetch water. And in those circumstances, you find that they're being beaten on their way back from drawing water. Others go missing, and then others have to actually skip school just to be able to get water, because that takes a lot of time. And they're like, okay, I can just go and get water and be at home. I don't have to go to school. And so you find that in this essence, climate change now becomes a human right issue, where girls are constantly being affected when they're not the ones that have actually caused climate change, and they're not the ones that are even contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions. And so we find that getting the voices of girls and young women heard, especially in climate change issues, is really critical, because they're the ones that are really affected. And so just going to the grassroots and getting those experiences and getting their voices heard and being in decision making spaces, you find that you're able to come up with solutions that actually work for them as a population that is really affected differently. And so that's why our work centers around girls and young women, also why it's very critical to actually include girls and young women in decision-making structures, especially on climate change.
Yes, I cannot agree more. I'm like snapping along. Yeah, and so many questions. I've really got to structure my thoughts because I'm so into this topic, but I have so many questions. And okay, before going into a bit more about like the youth and the girls, can you also explain the situation behind the link of sexual and reproductive health and rights and the climate crisis? Because in our pre-interview, you also mentioned about like access to contraceptives, I think, for example. So could you explain a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, sure. I said that earlier today. I was talking to someone else about a cyclone that just hit the southern region of Malawi, and most of the districts have been affected. And I think one of the issues that's really coming out is how that cyclone was actually an effect of climate change and affecting the southern districts of Malawi. And so that's an example of a climate crisis happening. And you find that in that essence, the houses have been destroyed, infrastructure has been destroyed, and especially hospitals have also been destroyed. And most of the people are in camps or temporary shelters to expect maybe building back better. And so in those instances where climate crisis actually happens, or there is a natural disaster that is induced by climate change, you'll find that most of the people that are actually put in camps are girls and young women. And there's some that actually need sexual reproductive health care, but then they do not have that at that moment because there are no infrastructures. And most of the doctors that are put in those shelters are usually men. And you find that women cannot go and open up to a man about maybe a sexual reproductive health issue that they have at the moment. And also to add to that, you find that most of the people that are also in the camps are girls, maybe below the ages of 10. and they don't even have anyone to talk to. And now they don't have anyone to talk to about maybe sexual reproductive health care and anything that can help them at that moment. And so you find that usually when we're doing when they're actually doing when they are doing different initiatives on climate action. I'm sorry about that. So
Your goddaughter's
when
in
we
the
do,
room. That's some good
yeah,
context for people listening. Your goddaughter is
exactly.
present as well. It's
Yeah.
great. It's a
Mhm.
girl who is getting involved in the conversation. That's what we love.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I was talking about how when we're doing responses to a climate change crisis or anything that is affecting young people, you'll find that that is not factored into the conversation, as well as you'll find that when we're talking about the linkages between climate change and sexual reproductive health, it's only talked about as sexual reproductive health or reproductive health, but it's not actually talked as a human right, because sexual reproductive health rights are actually a human right, and every individual actually deserves to have the right to access sexual reproductive health care. And so
Yes.
whenever a climate crisis happens and whenever people are affected, you'll find that that is not actually factored into any conversation, especially during a climate crisis. Right now, we have so many women that are pregnant and are in camps. They do not have any access to care because they're in a temporary shelter. They've lost everything that they had, and nobody's talking about maybe the baby formula that they'll need, the diapers that they'll need, or any healthcare that they'll need to actually be able to deliver safely. And so in these conversations is where you find that we never really talk about sexual reproductive health as much as we need to in climate change conversations, because that is very critical and that is something that is affecting different marginalized groups differently, especially for women and girls. And so another issue would be on how you will find that in whenever a climate crisis also occurs, there's so many, maybe the LGBTQI community that actually need access to sexual reproductive health care constantly than any other groups. And now they're forced to be in shelters with people maybe that are homophobic and they can't do anything about it because they're in that circumstance and they can't do anything to help themselves. And this also links to depression and constant cases of mental health issues. So that's also some of the effects that are happening, some of the connections that are there that are really not seen.
That's because these issues like having mental health problems, or the homophobia, for example, that's experienced, these issues don't happen by themselves, right? They're all connected
No.
and
Yes.
they need to be addressed as such as well.
Yeah.
Wow. So when did the cyclone hit?
I think it happened on from the week on the 13th of March. I think, yeah, the 13th of March up to somewhere around the 16th. So it was
Wow.
like it was continuous. There was a cyclone, and then there was flooding, and then there was water just exploding from everywhere. And yeah, it was it. I think it's the worst cyclone we've had for the past 3 or 4 years.
Oh, I'm so sorry. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's not that long ago as well. So I imagine there's also still
Mhm.
quite a lot of time for recovery, and that's going to affect
Yeah,
girls and SRHR and for some time
exactly.
longer.
Hmm.
Um, oh, wow. And does Green Girls platform work in these kind of situations, or how does your work function around this context?
Yeah, we do work in this context, and I think one of the things that we're proud of doing is last year, I think towards the end of last year, we had a training in two of the districts on how to prepare for a disaster or how you can be able to help others when a disaster strikes. And we're linking that to building resilience for girls and young women. And so one of the practices that we had was how if you see water, you can blow the whistle and you can call your friends to safety, and this is what you can do. And then during the cyclone, some of the girls actually used that and helped their girls and actually rescued some of the people there. And so I think that's something that we're proud of doing, that we actually able to train girls and young women on how to be prepared for a disaster, and they actually use that.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
yeah, but now this is like a different setting, because usually when we have floods, the same districts that are really affected, the ones that are in the lower share, that's like the lowest part of Malawi. But then the cyclone actually affected 12 out of the 28 districts that we have in the southern region. No, out of the 16 districts that are in the southern region. And then out of the 12 districts, you find that some were not even supposed to be affected, but they were affected because we didn't see it coming. And now
Wow.
infrastructure has been damaged and roads have been damaged, and then a different camps set up everywhere. And it's hard to actually come up with maybe responses that are targeted.
Oh, the sound's gone.
Oh,
Oh, now you're back. It's okay.
okay.
Zoom does this sometimes. I lost
Yeah,
you at responses that are targeted.
yeah. Oh, okay. So I was saying it's hard to come up with responses that are targeted because there is no one to actually give you a detailed account of what's going on. They do not have electricity because all the electricity poles were destroyed. And then people are in isolation and you can't tell what they really need. And it's hard for you to get there because there's no road or any bridges there. And so this is a different setting, and we're still trying to figure out how best to be able to help people short term, but also long term, to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or they're prepared for maybe um, the next disaster that may be induced anytime soon. So yeah, those are some of the things that we're trying to do, but we're still looking at what has already been done, what can be done, and what can be able to help as a longer term solution. So yeah.
Wow, you really have your plate full of all the different work that you do.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, it's of course it is sad that you have to prepare girls for these situations, but I think the fact that they remembered what you taught them, that's an amazing success, as you said. Like that's
Yeah.
really that's powerful. So that's amazing. I mean, that could have like saved lives as well. That's
Yes.
really incredible. Um, wow. Yeah, I think well, well sorry, this climate crisis, it just has so many impacts and so many avenues
Yes.
that need to be addressed in different ways. And yeah, I feel like people don't quite understand it, like the crisis, that much. Like
Yes.
maybe because it's called global warming by so many people that they think it's just the world getting a bit hotter, but of course it's not. It's also more natural disasters, and that has an effect on infrastructure, and that has an effect on health and education, and there are ripple effects to all of these things.
Yeah.
um so it's amazing that Green Girls platform is out there doing the good work.
Thank you.
And you mentioned how the very right sentiment that young people and girls especially should be in the room when decisions are being made, and they need to be like meaningfully included in decision making, specifically around the climate crisis and SRHR. So how do you work with policymakers and communities to create change, like keeping this ethos of meaningfully including girls? How does that work for Green Girls platform?
Okay. So in working with policymakers, usually we try to actually target our advocacy strategically, because we have different issues that happen at different scales. They are local scales where you know that an issue is only maybe for a certain community and can't be about a whole community. So we try to target the policymakers that are in that community. And for them to actually take the voices of young people, especially girls and young women, into account, we like to do a little bit of practice where we try to advocate with them to show them that these are the issues that the girls and the young women in your community are actually facing. And these are the things that they want. And we don't do that by just going there and talking about the things that we know from the communities that we're coming from, but we give the space to the people that are from the community. So before we talk to the policymaker, we talk to the girls and young women in the communities, asking them about the issues that they're facing, maybe the solutions that they think can help them in their own context, and how they think the policymakers can come in. And so when we do these exercises, we find that girls and women are able to actually come up with issues that they're facing, and they're actually able to talk about them better than we can. And the best way that we can help them is to just give them space to talk to the policymaker. And so when they talk to the policymaker about the issues that they're facing, then we ask the policymakers if they can just give space for girls and young women to be represented in their governance structures. And so in circumstances where we have small scales, they actually engage there's something that they call the Village Natural Resource Management Committee. And then there is the Area Development Committee. Those are like different committees that are at district level and village level. And so we try to just get the girls and young women into that space to just engage the policymakers in that space, and then see if there is any change in maybe the dynamics or how they actually address issues. And in most circumstances, you'll find that maybe after 2 meetings, they're like, okay, now we get it. We really need them to be in these spaces, and they start creating space for more girls and young women to come in. And in those spaces, then girls are able to actually talk about their issues, and they're able to advocate for their fellow girls and young women in the community because they're given the space to talk. And so that's how we work with policymakers that are really at a small scale. And then we have policymakers that are like at national level in Malawi. And so for that, we faced a lot of barriers because most people didn't take us seriously. They were like, you're just a group of girls and young women. What can you do? And what you're doing is not really useful because this is like a space for big boys and you're not allowed in. And so, yeah, we had to really work our way in by using people that are really passionate about girls and young women empowerment. And so one of the things that we did was to organize a small conference and just invite one policymaker to come and see what we're doing and the impact that it has on the lives of girls and young women in Malawi. And so when she came in and she saw what we were doing, she was like, oh, this is really important. And this is really something that the government is lacking, like the voices that we do not hear often. And so through that, she was able to invite us in, like whenever there was a parliamentary committee and they needed the voices of girls and young women to be represented, they'd be like, oh, okay, I have girls that can really represent other girls, and I'll invite them. And so we started coming into that space and really talking about the issues that girls and young women are facing, and talking about how the policies are not gender responsive and gender is not mainstreamed in any of the adaptation strategies that are there. And that whatever data that we have in Malawi that talks about young women and girls or women in general and how climate change affects them, it's not really disaggregated. It's just in general. Like this is the percentage of people that are affected, and you don't hear about the gender disaggregated data that actually tells you that this is the number of women that are affected, and these are the interventions that we're doing that are really targeting girls and young women. And so when we started having those conversations with policymakers, they were like, oh, okay, we are really a group of serious girls that really want to make change. And so we think that whatever you're doing can really represent the voices of girls and young women in the country. And so in that issue, they were able to maybe give us space and hear us out. And actually, we could advocate with them on any issues that we were facing that they can really take they can really make a difference, or maybe they can really change their policies or work around how they're able to target interventions for girls and young women. And so yeah, that's how we have been working with policymakers.
And it sounds like they're pretty receptive as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
now they
they're
are.
receptive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, like,
Yes.
how long did it take for this outcome to happen?
I think we started doing this in 2018 and we actually broke through in 2022. So it took us a very long time.
Yeah. But that's like advocacy, right? It's slow. It's
Yes.
slow work. Policy making, yeah, very slow work.
Yeah.
But so 4 years is actually not that long in the campaigning world.
Yes, it's not.
But that's amazing that like you have the ear of national legislators and
Yes.
they can directly talk to girls about the issues that they're facing.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And do you find that policymakers are also receptive to talking about issues related to SRHR? So like, yeah, access to contraceptives or safe abortion, for example, or is that too much?
I think that's still too much because they're not even receptive to have the gender conversation, really. They just want to have representation in the room. And so
Okay.
we've been trying to do baby steps to just make sure that we're in the room. And then after that, then maybe we can talk about the real issues that girls and women are facing. But I think now that we have so many things that are happening, and whenever we talk about the nature of how climate change affects girls and young women, and how we have so many issues that are intersecting, and some that are really affect them differently. Now they're willing to actually hear about the conversation about sexual reproductive health rights and connecting it to climate change.
Mm.
Because we had a conversation with there are different ministries in our government, and they work in silos. They don't even work together. And you find that there is the Ministry of Gender, and then there is the Ministry of Climate Change, but they never work together. And we're like, these two ministries have to work together, because whenever we're talking about gender and how women and girls are affected by climate change, then the other ministry comes in, but you do not work together, and you do not know what one ministry is doing from the other. That actually brings in separation. But if you work together and you hear each other out, you can be able to come up with adaptation strategies or solutions that are sustainable and that can actually help girls and young women differently. So we saw that they're actually planning to have an interface meeting between the two ministries to
Oh,
actually plan on how they can work together, maybe build the synergies, or try to come up with something that is working in a different way. And I think that's something that is like a silver lining, because it happens because of the crisis that we just had. They were like, okay, maybe we need to sit down and talk about this differently. And so, yeah.
so that really like kicks them into gear, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I mean, that is it's a very harsh way to get them to actually sit down and talk, but they're sitting down and
Yeah.
sitting down and talking now.
Mm-hmm.
And will you be part of that discussion? Is that what you're also advocating for, or?
We're advocating for it, but I think this is only government business and we're not allowed in.
Mm.
But then we'll wait for them to have it and then tell us what comes out of it.
Okay. And hopefully by next year you'll be the one in the room deciding.
Yes,
Uh,
hopefully.
Amazing.
Mhm.
So what other successes have you found while doing this work? Because I think it's very easy for us to focus on like the challenges and the difficulties, but I also think that, you know, when we're sharing information about the intersection between SRHR and climate change, we've got to share some positive news as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, can you share like what are some things since you started that you're like really proud of, like the whistle story?
Um, yeah, there's so many things that I'm proud of personally,
I
because
love
it's
that.
been a long it's been a long journey, and just seeing things happen is different. But I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is how we were only 5 when we started, and it was really hard to get people to believe that climate change is happening and this is really an issue, and we have to do something about this as girls and young women. Because at that moment, we're not really feeling the effects of climate change in Malawi. It was just like at a small scale and things that we're really used to already, and people didn't believe that actually happened. And whenever we try to engage with schools, some of the parents would really refrain, to really get their kids out, like, no, we want to teach our kids bad manners. This is not allowed. And then we wouldn't be able to find them the other way. And but then we had to change our approach multiple times to really bring people in and just hear them out, and then see where we can be able to, maybe where there was the gap in information, and would be able to build that out. And I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is that we've been able to move from 5 people to approximately 10,000 girls and young women across Malawi now.
I'm
And
sorry. Let's pause for effect there. 10,000?
yeah,
You're reaching 10. That is incredible, Joy. What?
yeah.
Let's just let the audience soak that number in for a moment. That's incredible. I mean, and you started with 5 people.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, sorry. I
Mhm.
interrupted. Carry on. Let me just bask in the glow of your
Yeah.
successes. Uh
Mhm.
amazing.
And I think that's something that's wild because we never thought we'd be able to do that. And the fact that you'd hear people just talking about green girls when you're not there, somebody would tell you that, oh, there was somebody that talked about green girls. This is what I heard about you guys. What do you do? Want to join you and whatever? And you're like, oh, really? Somebody talked about us? And then it's really inspiring just to see that. And oh, I think the other thing that was really inspiring was that our government system is trying to change the education system to really integrate climate change into the syllabus. And so one of the people reached out and they were like, okay, we love the work that Green Girls platform is doing and would like to document that and put that into um, the books that the new learners are going
Wow.
to learn about. I'm like, oh, really? Our work actually will be included in the syllabus. And I think that's also a huge success for us. It's
Yes.
like a win that they'll be able to learn about just a group of girls that wanted to do something differently. And
Yes.
yeah, and I think the other biggest success is on the advocacy part, on where we're trying to do a campaign on mainstreaming gender into the national climate change management policy and how we do not have data that is actually gender disaggregated, just to be able to collect data and tell that this is what's happening. And now the Environmental Affairs Department actually changed how they report their data, how they collect their data. They're able to provide gender disaggregated information and tell you that, oh, okay, we went into this district. This is what's happening. This is the number of women that really have been impacted. Adaptation strategies. And
You disappeared for a moment.
oh no.
No.
Okay, I'm back now.
So you're back now, but I don't know if I missed anything. Um,
Uh,
you were talking about the last thing you said was impacted. So you
mhm.
about gender disaggregated data.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think now we're able to get data that is oh, data that is actually gender disaggregated and talks about the effects of climate change differently and the interventions that have been done differently. And so I think that's also a huge win because for advocacy campaigns, that'll be made easy when you have actual numbers and actual gender disaggregated data that tells the differences in how women and men are impacted and how girls and young women are impacted and how we can be able to do something about it. And I think that's also a win because that shows that our advocacy campaign is actually really doing something and actually influencing policymakers to do things differently. And I think another huge success is that last year we're able to send at least 3 of the representatives from Green Girls platform to COP27, and they were
Amazing.
shadowing, yeah, and they were shadowing different negotiators, and they were representing the voices of young people as well as the voices of girls and young women in the climate change delegation from Malawi. And this year, they're planning to up that number and maybe have more girls and young women representing because of the amazing work that the representatives from Green Girls did and how they were able to bring in perspectives from the grassroots and talk about it differently. And I think that was a huge win because we had never really been in COP meetings and really shadowing negotiators and talking about climate change in the aspect of girls and young women. So yeah, I think those are some of the successes
Oh
that we've
gosh.
had. And and I think one of the other successes is the We Trust Youth initiative, which I know, Poppy, you already know about it because Choice for Youth is in it. But I think that has really helped us to really be out there and people to learn about the work that Green Girls is doing, especially on young people, and also how we're able now to negotiate partnerships with other non-youth led organizations differently and also advocate for funding that is actually sustainable. I think one of our funders reached out and they were like, okay, we saw what you did with waitress youth work, and we think that maybe we're not fair with how we've been working with you. How can we change how we fund your work? And I think that was really amazing, because that would never have happened if we were not part of the waitress youth global initiative. So yeah, those are just some of the
Oh,
successes that we've had.
I love that. And maybe before celebrating your successes, which I'm going to do because I have so many follow-up questions because there were so many successes, could you just briefly explain what the We Trust Youth initiative is for people who don't know?
Okay, so the We Trust Youth Initiative is a global initiative that was started by 5 different youth-led organizations around the world. So there is Green Girls Platform from Malawi, there is Choice for Youth and Sexuality from the Netherlands, and then there is Coparos Zambia and Yoborkeno from Mexico, and the International Youth Alliance for Family Planning. And all of us came together to challenge donors and NGOs to work differently with young people in a more equitable and a relationship that is based on trust. And so we started in 2021, where we held a series of workshops talking about the issues that young people expressed, on how donors and NGOs partner with them. And then we had workshops where we had donors, NGOs, and young people in the same room talking about how the inequalities that young people face and the things that donors and NGOs can do differently. And so in those workshops, we're able to reimagine the way that donors and NGOs work with young people, and change, disrupt power, and see how that the money moves actually to young people, and young people are the ones that are in control. And I think from that, we actually had a lot of successes, and we're planning to actually keep on doing the work. It was supposed to be for 1 year, but now we're planning to extend it because we've seen that this is critical work, and we can actually help young people to negotiate for contracts or funding differently, and to be able to make sure that the power actually lies in young people, and young people are trusted more. So yeah, that's basically what the We Trust Youth Initiative is in brief.
Thank you for explaining. I also know my colleague Karis is going to be very happy to get some free promotion for We Trust Youth on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a great initiative. It's really changing how donors and especially youth-led organizations work together. So great to hear that a donor reached out to you and like had reflected on their role. That's amazing. That's the whole point of the project, right?
Yes.
Love it. And I wanted to ask you about the climate change syllabus that you mentioned that Green Girls platform is going to be talked about in, which is super cool. Like that means what is it a nationwide syllabus? So like every young person will learn about your work?
Yes.
I mean, I feel like we need to celebrate this. That's a huge win. Wow. So first of all, that's super cool that there's going to be a climate change syllabus.
Yes.
Like, how did that come about? Do you know?
Yeah, I think we've been pushing for this to actually happen with the National Youth Network on Climate Change, to make sure that climate change is integrated into the syllabus that young people are actually learning in Malawi, because we know that climate change will affect the next generation more than it's affecting us now. And if we do not change maybe the actions that we're doing, it'll be hard for the next generation to cope. And so we're actually telling them that it's critical to actually include this, and young people have to learn about climate change at a younger age so that they know what's coming, or they know how they can come up with solutions that work for young people. And if we're to engage young people in decision-making structures, then they have to know about the issues that are on the table, and they have to be able to actually actively participate. And so I think we've been doing this since since 2015. And that's how advocacy work goes. And I think in
Yeah.
in 2021, that's when they developed a climate change learning handbook for young people. But then it wasn't in a Malawian context. It was just an abstract book that you read. My Wi-Fi.
That's okay.
Yeah.
The Zoom also like dropped. So I was like, do we
Oh,
have the first part of the recording? But it said recording in progress. So
okay.
I
I
hope we're okay.
think that's great.
I hope we're not gonna have to like re-record.
Yeah.
So the last thing you said that I heard was about the syllabus or the document that was created before was not Malawi specific.
Yes. And we actually had to engage also the Ministry of Education on how that was just a simple handbook that young people would not really be able to understand, but to just integrate climate change differently in the Malawian context, where you talk about real issues that young people in Malawi are facing that can actually help them to understand climate change differently, because it's hard to understand something when you haven't seen the effects, but it's easier to understand something that you see on a daily basis or understand easily. And so I think they took that into account. We didn't even know they were taking that into account until they reached out and they were like, okay, we want to include your story in this book. And we're like, oh, they actually listened. So yeah.
Nice. That's a nice surprise when
It
people do
is.
actually listen. But that's
It
so
is.
cool. And that's amazing. So the next generation of learners is going to directly learn about that link between climate crisis and SRHR.
Yes.
That's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, amazing. Can you tell? Am I fangirling too hard over Green Girls platform? Is it a bit weird now? Should I
Yes,
dial it
you
back a
are.
bit?
No, don't dial it back. We love it.
This is great for your ego right now.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, everyone who's going to be listening to this podcast is going to be like, Poppy, you sound really intense right now.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so cool that you have this this syllabus. When is it going to come out? When is it going to first be implemented in schools?
We're not really sure. I think they're supposed to announce that in the coming months. So we're not really sure when, but we know it's coming.
Nice. So exciting. I would love to read that, because I think that should be something that's done in every country, in every school. Like, as you say, it's going to affect the next generation everywhere. And I think it's also really important for people to be aware of how it affects different countries differently. Like how it affects different contexts, how it affects different groups of people. People need to be aware. And this is a big question. What is the goal that you see, and like what vision do you have for Green Girls platform, but also for the work that you do?
If you asked me this 5 years ago, I'd have said we just want to reach at least 1,000 girls. But now that we've said that anything is possible, and I think the biggest goal that we want to see is just to see girls and young women being looked at as agents of change, and especially being able to be in all governance structures that actually talk about girls and young women, especially on climate change, but also on the linkages between climate change and sexual reproductive health rights. And I think we were just talking the other day with my team, and they're like, what would we want to see in the next 5 years? So one of the girls was like, okay, I really just want to see green girls being the people that people come to when they want to talk about the linkages between sexual reproductive health rights and climate change, but also to talk about how girls and young women are affected at a grassroots level. I was like, oh, so it would be like the hub. And then, but then I think our biggest goal and our biggest inspiration is just to see girls come up with solutions to the climate crisis that are sustainable and that work in their own context. and solutions that can be able to help them and lift them out of poverty, because that's one of the things that Malawi is really facing. And if we can be able to beat poverty by climate solutions, then that can just portray girls differently and portray young women differently, and people would actually see the power that we have as girls and young women. So yeah, I think that's the biggest goal, and that's one thing that I really want to see.
I love that. I think
Mhm.
that's a great goal to have, and also it's achievable. Like
Yeah.
that's 100% something that can happen.
Mhm.
Especially considering like how quickly you have moved like and
Yeah.
expanded in your work, despite
Mhm.
how slow advocacy work is generally.
Mhm.
Yes, I was gonna ask, so you talked about how like um it's a climate change is a very gendered issue, and you want young girls and like young women to be seen as agents of change and as powerful as they really are, which is
Mhm.
really powerful. Um, and
Mhm.
how do you work with, for example, men and boys to bridge that gap to make them see how powerful young girls and young women are, but also have them as allies? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we include men and boys in this issue?
Mhm. Yeah. So we we work with men and boys usually in all our programs, because we know that we can't have empowered girls and young women in a vacuum, because they're men and boys that are already there. And so what we do is in our interventions, especially in primary schools and secondary schools, we try to have girls and boys in the same room and talk about climate change in the same way that we would talk to a girl, and then ask them what they feel are the impacts of climate change. And so you'll find that usually most of the times boys don't really realize that these are actually the effects that climate change has on girls, because it's just a conversation that we have and they're like, oh, okay, that's their usual job. They don't even feel anything. But then when you talk about it from the perspective of a girl and boys are able to hear it, they're like, oh, okay, when I go back home, I'm telling my mom that next time I'll go and draw water. She doesn't have to do it. And so we try to make sure that they understand where we're coming from and the effects of climate change from the perspective of a girl or a young woman. And then when you do that, then you find that the conversations change and the dynamics change, and they're able to understand climate change differently, or how climate change affects girls and young women differently. And that's how we do it with boys in communities and in schools. But for men that are really not really that do not really believe in climate change, we had that instance where we had to talk to a chief and really convince him that there was climate change and things were changing. And I think for people like that, then we try to engage. We try to make them look at what has been happening in the past, what is happening now, and to hear the stories from the people that have really been affected. And when they hear that, they're able to tell that there is something that has been happening, there are changes that are going on, and we really need to take action. And in most of our work, we try to have partners with um, men that are also working on climate justice, because we know that climate justice also incorporates gender justice, and we try to make them understand the linkages that are there, and we try to have them as allies so that we can be able to push the same agenda and be able that we're making strides differently. And I think one of the groups that I've really been working with in Malawi that has really helped us to grow and really helped our advocacy work is the Association of Environmental Journalists, because they're journalists that are always documenting stories about how climate change is affecting people in Malawi. And when they heard about our work, they were able to really document it differently and tell our stories in a different way that we had never even tried. They took videos of our work whenever we're in the communities teaching, and just snippets, and then share them and talk about our work, not really about what they think our work is, but really what they actually experienced. And so people were really able to hear us out and be able to engage with us and learn from us. And so I think And the fact that that group, like 80% are men, but they were able to document the work that we're doing was really something that is really cool. And just seeing them as allies has really helped us to put the message across and really get people listening to us. So yeah.
That's great. So you really you moved into different sectors to also engage men and boys. That's such a good idea working with the media, because I guess it's very easy, like in our sector, to be, what is it, preaching to the choir. Like people very much, if you're in the sector, you kind of agree with
Yes.
the issues that we work on. But yeah, working with the media is a great way to reach other people who maybe wouldn't disagree, just don't have the information.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how do you face quite a lot of opposition? Because you mentioned about the chief who didn't believe in climate change. Like, what are the challenges that you face in your work?
Oh, challenges. I think there are a lot of them because um, firstly, the nature of climate change is really complex.
Mm.
And whenever you're trying to help girls and young women, you can just focus on maybe gender equality, but you also have to focus on other issues that really affect a girl. Because when we start talking about girls, you have to look at their right to education, their right to sexual reproductive health rights, their right to life, their right to food. And when you look at that, you find that climate change actually affects all that. There's so many intersecting issues that are happening. And so we can't really just try to maybe address the issue of climate change by just providing climate education. We also have to provide menstrual education. We have to provide menstrual hygiene equipment. We also have to provide education and leadership trainings. And so it gets too much and we have to do a lot at the same time. But also, I think that's the first challenge because it's really complex and we have to do so much. And you find that most of the times it's just like 6 of us and it's hard to actually factor everything in. And we we don't really get burnt out, but we end up feeling like we are not doing enough because we're not able to really do everything. And the second thing is opposition. I think that used to be a challenge, but now we figured out how to navigate talking to leaders that don't really believe in our message or our work. And so on that, I think like one of the examples that we had is one of the communities that we were going to. The people didn't believe in our work. They didn't believe that there was climate change because they're in a rural area and the environment is really cool and they don't really experience anything. And so they thought that what we're teaching is not really important. And so in that community, we tried to have a sit down with the policymakers in the area and just hear them out. We had like a knowledge co-creation or sharing session where they told us about what they believe in, what they think is happening and what is going on, and how they feel like what we're doing is just to get donor money and then waste it and then don't do anything about it. And so when we sat down with them and we told them where we're coming from, and we didn't even have funding at that time. We just girls that were really passionate about working. And then they were like, okay. After we sat down and we talked, and they were like, okay, now we get what you're doing. And we think that this is what we can do. And together we can actually make a difference. And so whenever now we have people that are blocking us or don't believe us or maybe in opposition, we try to sit down and just rethink or maybe hear them out and then let them hear us out and then see how best we can go forward. And so I was saying in cases where we have oppositions or people don't believe in our work or they're blocking us, we try to have a sit down with them and just reason together and co-create new ways of working and hear where they're coming from and they can hear us out as well. And then we're able to chart the way forward using that system. And that has really helped us to really face issues that have to do with opposition in that way. So that's how we've dealt with that challenge. But it used to be a huge challenge for us because we didn't know how best to work with people that were in opposition. So yeah, And I think the other challenge, and I think this is not only for green girls, but it's about all feminist organizations, especially those that are working on climate change, is that environmental work or feminist work on climate change is really underfunded. And if you actually get funding, it has so many red tapes. We're lucky because we've been able to work with so many flexible funders, but then you will find that that funding is really not something that can be able to sustain the organization as we go. And with the way of living is constantly changing and prices of things are going up, you find that you're not able to do everything because you do not have enough funding to do everything that you want. And we have to work with limited funds to make sure that we have a huge impact. And I think that's also a huge challenge. And that's something that has been bulking us to be able to reach so many girls and young women in Malawi, or maybe at a higher scale, because that's how it is. Feminist work is underfunded, and nobody actually wants to really fund feminist work because some don't actually believe that what we're doing is really important. So yeah,
that's so true. Like, gender is very much seen as a soft, in quotation marks, soft issue. Like, it's not seen as food, housing, peace. Like, there's a lot of funding that goes into those things because they're seen as critical. But if you don't invest in feminist issues, in gender issues, like in tackling them, then the repercussions from that affect every other sector, affect everything. And it is so frustrating, as you say, that it's so underfunded. And then there's also like, if there is funding, there's so many hoops you have to jump through, and also inflation. Oh, I recognize that. I think people don't understand like quite how much inflation has impacted the NGO sector. Like, there's so the amount that we can do has changed a lot. It is, I think we could have a whole separate podcast episode on funding and like on youth friendly feminist funding. So I'm not gonna dive too much into that now, because I think it would be very interesting to talk about. But yeah, thank you for sharing your challenges. Definitely, you're definitely coming up against some very high walls, but also from the successes that you mentioned, I think you're scaling them pretty well. It's great that you're able to have dialogue with people who originally either didn't believe in climate change or didn't view the feminist aspect of climate crisis. So I think it's amazing that you've managed to have dialogues with those people. And I'm fangirling again. I'll stop.
Don't stop.
So I think I want to start wrapping up this discussion, because again, I'm seeing so many various threads off this initial discussion we're having, which we could do a whole other podcast episodes on. And I'm getting way too engrossed in this conversation that we could keep talking for hours. But I do want to know, like, what is something, especially for young people listening to this episode, what is something that you really want them to know about climate justice, for example, and also how it relates to sexual and reproductive justice?
For
Just
young people
question
that are listening to this, so I think it's one thing that we have to understand. I think I already mentioned this area earlier, that sexual reproductive health rights are human rights, and every individual deserves that. And if we're to talk about climate justice, then we have to talk about the rights that are incorporated in it, and how vulnerable groups actually need to be considered. And I think that by just looking at that, it'll be critical for us to really talk about how sexual reproductive health rights and sexual reproductive justice is really something that is critical and central to the lives of girls and young women. And for young people listening to this, I think it's really our fight to make sure that sexual reproductive health rights are not kept out of conversations on climate change, and that everyone really understands that as a young person, having access to sexual reproductive health rights or sexual reproductive justice, and in a climate crisis, it's critical. And I think another thing is that we can't really have climate justice if we do not have sexual reproductive justice. Like
Yes.
that cannot happen, because that is not justice, and that is not something that we can talk about proudly. And as young people, it is up to us to really include the conversations on sexual reproductive health rights in the climate change conversations, and to make sure that people actually know the linkages, and that they're able to really understand that as a young person, having access to sexual reproductive health rights and having sexual reproductive justice, it's something that is really important and critical to all of us. So yeah.
I love it. It's up to us. It shouldn't only be up to us, but we are the change makers, and it is up to us.
Yes.
I think that's a great message. And yeah, as you said, there is no climate justice without sexual and reproductive justice. Nah. Thank you so much. And is there, because this is a very heavy topic, and I think there's also a lot of, in our generation, a lot of climate anxiety as well, led upon the issues that we face as women as well. Do you have, like, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to, do you have like a message of hope or something, like a positive thing that young people can take away listening to this podcast? Or not just young people, but like adults too.
Yeah. My message of hope would be that I believe in humans. I believe that if we actually come together, we can make a difference. And I've seen that happen before, where we're ready to be in conflict, but just because people sat down and listened to each other, things actually changed. And I believe that humans can come back together, and as humans, we can be able to work together for a better world, or a just world. And so I think that's what gives me hope. And by seeing the number of people that are willing to work on climate action now compared to how it was maybe a year ago, it's also something that gives me hope that people actually are actually fighting for a better world, and we actually want to make a difference. So I believe that everything is possible, and if we just come together, we can make magic. And so I think that's something that brings hope, that we can actually do something differently. And we shouldn't lose hope just because maybe some people don't want to come back together. But the fact that as humans, we can be able to work things out, I think it can also help us to make a difference. So we shouldn't lose hope, but keep fighting, because I believe in the power that people have.
I think that is beautiful. Believe in the power that people have. I don't think there's a better way to end this episode. I'm just going to let those words hang there. And I want to thank you so much for your time, for taking the time to inform everyone about the link between the climate crisis and SRHR, showing how powerful young people are, and how much knowledge young people have, and why young people should be in the room and making decisions. Thank you so much. And I really hope people have enjoyed this episode. Is there somewhere that people can find you and Green Girls platform online? I can also share various links in the show notes as well, but do you have anything you want to plug before we wrap up?
Not really. I think if you're able to find us, then people can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And I think on our website as well, it's greengirlsplatformmalawi.org. So yeah.
Great. I will share all of that in the show notes, but just thank you so much for your time. And I hope you have a lovely day and keep fighting the good fight. You're doing amazing.
Thank you for having me.